The words hit like a slap across the face at Sunday dinner, spoken with the casual cruelty that only family can deliver. Sarah's nice and all, but let's be honest, she's not more successful than you, Michael. She's just playing entrepreneur with her little computer thing. My father, Robert Martinez, wiped his mouth with the cloth napkin my mother had insisted on using for special occasions, completely unaware that he'd just dismissed 3 years of 18-hour days, sleepless nights, and the kind of grinding determination that had built something extraordinary from absolutely nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I sat frozen at the familiar oak dining table in my childhood, home in Scottsdale, the same table where I'd done homework, celebrated birthdays, and dreamed of proving myself worthy of the kind of respect my older brother Michael seemed to earn simply by existing. The Arizona sun streamed through the lace curtains my mother had hung 20 years ago, casting patterns across the same beige walls that had witnessed countless moments of feeling invisible, overlooked, dismissed as the dreamy younger daughter who never quite fit the mold of traditional success. Michael straightened his tie, the expensive silk one that matched his custom-tailored suit, and offered me what I'd learned to recognize as his patronizing smile. "Dad's right, Sarah. I mean, what you're doing is cute, but real estate is a proven industry. I closed $2 million in sales just last month. How much revenue is your little blog business bringing in?" The question hung in the air like smoke, designed to humiliate, to reduce 3 years of building something meaningful into a hobby that barely deserved acknowledgment. I could have told him about the 6-figure months we'd been having since January. I could have mentioned the automated marketing platform I'd spent 2 years developing in secret, the one that was already generating passive income while he chased commission checks. I could have explained that my little computer thing had helped 43 small businesses double their revenue in the past year alone, creating jobs and transforming lives in ways his property deals never would. Instead, I took a slow sip of my iced tea and smiled the kind of smile that gives nothing away. My name is Sarah Martinez, and at 32, I've spent most of my life being the daughter who didn't quite measure up to family expectations. While Michael was quarterback of his high school football team and later graduated summa cum laude from Arizona State's business program, I was the quiet one buried in books about technology and marketing, always asking too many questions about how things worked and why they couldn't work better. My parents, first-generation Mexican-Americans who'd built their life through hard work and traditional values, understood Michael's path. Real estate was tangible, respectable, something they could explain to their friends at church. My digital marketing consultancy might as well have been written in a foreign language. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in that dining room, surrounded by the familiar scents of my mother's cooking and the weight of decades of feeling like I was speaking into a void. 3 days earlier, I'd signed the lease on a corner office in downtown Phoenix, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows and space for the 5 employees I was planning to hire by the end of the quarter. The signed contract was sitting in my purse, next to business cards that read, Sarah Martinez, founder and CEO, Catalyst Digital Solutions. But in this room, I was still just the little sister who'd never found her place in the family hierarchy of accomplishments. "Sarah, honey, maybe you should think about getting a more stable job," my mother, Elena, said gently, her voice carrying the particular mix of love and concern that had followed me through every unconventional choice I'd ever made. Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter just got promoted to manager at the bank. Very respectable position. Good benefits. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand, and I felt the familiar ache of being loved, but not understood. Supported, but not believed in. Michael leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying his position as the family success story. "I'm not trying to be harsh, Sarah, but at some point, you have to face reality. You've been at this for 3 years? If it was going to work, wouldn't it have worked by now? He gestured around the room as if the house itself was evidence of what real success looked like. I mean, I bought my first investment property when I was 28. I've got a portfolio worth over $2 million now. That's success you can measure. What Michael didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while he was buying properties with traditional financing and conventional wisdom, I'd been quietly revolutionizing how small businesses approached their marketing. The platform I'd developed didn't just manage social media or send email newsletters. It used artificial intelligence to predict customer behavior, automate personalized outreach, and optimize marketing spend in real time. I'd spent 18 months learning coding languages that didn't exist when I was in college, partnering with developers in 3 different time zones, and testing algorithms on my own clients before I dared to scale it. My first client, a small bakery in Tempe, had been struggling to compete with the corporate chains moving into their neighborhood. Within 6 months of implementing my system, their online orders had increased by 300%, and they'd opened a second location. The yoga studio that couldn't fill classes was now running retreats in Sedona. The family-owned restaurant that was 3 months behind on rent had a waiting list every weekend. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These were families, dreams, livelihoods, transformed by work that my own family dismissed as playing around on the computer. The thing is, my father continued, cutting into his steak with the precision of someone who'd spent 30 years in construction management. Business is about fundamentals. Location, relationships, proven systems. You can't just make things up as you go along and expect them to work. He looked at me with the expression I'd seen 1,000 times before, the one that said he was about to deliver wisdom that would fix my misguided approach to life. Michael understands that. He's building something solid, something that will last. I nodded politely, the way I'd learned to do over 3 decades of these conversations. What I wanted to say was that my supposedly unstable business had generated more profit in the past 6 months than Michael's real estate commissions. And unlike his feast or famine industry, my revenue was growing consistently every month. I wanted to tell them about the client who'd sent me a handwritten note thanking me for saving her family's hardware store, or the teenager who'd gotten a scholarship because the nonprofit I'd helped grow was able to expand their mentorship program. Instead, I excused myself to help my mother clear the dishes, a ritual that had remained unchanged since I was old enough to reach the sink. In the kitchen, surrounded by the familiar chaos of Sunday dinner cleanup, my mother spoke in the hushed tones reserved for difficult conversations. "Misha, I worry about you. You're so smart, so capable. But this business thing, it's so uncertain. What if it doesn't work out? What if you wake up at 40 with nothing to show for it?" I rinsed plates in the warm, soapy water, watching the suds swirl down the drain, and chose my words carefully. "Mom, what if it does work out? What if I'm building something that matters, something that helps people?" I could hear the hope in my own voice, the same hope that had carried me through countless late nights and early mornings, through rejection and doubt, and the kind of grinding uncertainty that comes with creating something from nothing. She dried a glass slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. "I just want you to be happy, to be secure. Your father and I, we worked so hard to give you and Michael opportunities we never had. We want to see you succeed." The word "succeed" hung between us, heavy with the weight of different definitions, different dreams, different measures of what it meant to build a life worth living. Back in the dining room, Michael was showing my father photos on his phone of his latest property acquisition, a commercial building in Scottsdale that he was planning to flip. "The numbers are incredible, Dad. I'll clear at least $300,000 on this deal alone." My father nodded approvingly, asking detailed questions about square footage, zoning restrictions, and profit margins. This was the language they both spoke fluently, the vocabulary of traditional success that I'd never quite mastered. I rejoined them at the table, setting down fresh coffee and listening to their animated discussion about market trends and investment strategies. There was something beautiful about watching them connect over shared understanding, something that made me simultaneously proud of Michael's accomplishments and acutely aware of my own outsider status. They weren't trying to exclude me. They simply couldn't see the value in what I was building because it didn't fit their framework for understanding achievement. "Sarah, you should ask Michael to teach you about real estate," my father suggested, as if he'd solved a complex puzzle. "Maybe you could get your license, work with him, build something together." The suggestion was offered with genuine kindness, the kind of paternal guidance that came from a place of love, but missed the mark entirely. In his mind, the solution to my professional struggles was to abandon my path and follow the proven route that had worked for his son. Michael's face lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found the perfect solution to an annoying problem. "Actually, that's not a bad idea. I could use someone to help with the marketing side of things, social media, websites, that kind of stuff. It would be perfect for you, Sarah. You'd be using your computer skills, but in a real business with real profits." The offer was delivered with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed he was extending a generous opportunity, completely oblivious to the fact that he was essentially suggesting I become his employee in an industry I had no passion for. I smiled and thanked him for the consideration, but inside, something crystallized. This conversation, this moment, represented everything I'd been working to prove wrong. The assumption that my business was a hobby waiting to be abandoned for something more legitimate. The belief that success could only look one way, be measured by one set of standards, validated by one type of recognition. The casual dismissal of 3 years of learning, building, growing, and achieving things that mattered deeply to me, even if they didn't make sense to anyone else. As the evening wound down and we moved to the living room for dessert, I found myself observing my family with a mixture of love and determination. My mother brought out the flan she'd spent hours perfecting, the same recipe she'd learned from her own mother decades ago. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They were building a community of loyal practitioners who received personalized recommendations based on their attendance patterns and feedback, creating retention rates that their competitors couldn't match. This wasn't luck or good timing. This was the result of understanding that in a world increasingly driven by data, the businesses that could harness that data intelligently would thrive while others struggled to keep up. I'd spent 2 years learning programming languages that didn't exist when I was in college, partnering with developers who shared my vision of making sophisticated marketing tools accessible to small businesses that couldn't afford enterprise-level solutions. David Kim arrived at 3 o'clock sharp, his presence filling our temporary conference room with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from backing successful ventures. At 45, he'd already helped launch 3 companies that had gone on to transform their industries, and his interest in Catalyst digital solutions validated what I'd suspected but hadn't dared to voice. We weren't just another marketing consultancy. We were sitting on technology that could revolutionize how small businesses compete in an increasingly complex marketplace. "Sarah, I've been reviewing your platform specifications, and I have to tell you, what you've built is remarkable." He opened his laptop and pulled up a presentation that made my heart race with possibilities I'd only dreamed about. The predictive algorithms alone are worth more than most companies in this space generate in annual revenue. But it's the accessibility that makes this truly special. You've taken enterprise-level technology and made it usable for businesses with 5-figure marketing budgets. I sat straighter in my chair, feeling the shift that comes when someone finally sees what you've been building in the dark. That was always the goal. Level the playing field. Give small businesses the same advantages that Fortune 500 companies take for granted. The words came out steady and sure, backed by months of testing and refinement, and the kind of deep conviction that only comes from solving real problems for real people. David leaned forward, his expression serious but excited. I want to offer you a partnership that goes beyond traditional investment. Full operational support, access to our development team, and a pathway to scale this nationally within 18 months. We're talking about transforming how millions of small businesses approach marketing. He slid a contract across the table. The terms are generous because we believe this technology could define the next decade of small business growth. I picked up the document, scanning numbers that represented more than money. They represented validation, expansion, and the resources to hire the team that would take Catalyst Digital Solutions from a promising startup to an industry leader. The partnership would provide funding for the next phase of development, access to enterprise clients, and the kind of strategic support that turns good ideas into lasting companies. There's one thing I need to know, David continued, his tone shifting to something more personal. Are you prepared for what comes next? Because if we do this, if we scale this platform the way I think we can, you won't be running a small consultancy anymore. You'll be leading a technology company with national reach and the responsibility that comes with that level of influence. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications I'd been avoiding. Success at this level would mean leaving behind the comfortable anonymity of being underestimated. It would mean stepping into a spotlight that would make Sunday dinner conversations irrelevant because the whole industry would be watching. It would mean taking responsibility not just for my own dreams, but for the livelihoods of everyone who chose to build their future alongside mine. I thought about Jessica, already working at a level far beyond what her title suggested, believing in something she'd helped create. I thought about the clients who'd trusted me with their most precious asset, their business, and seen results that exceeded their wildest expectations. I thought about the developers who'd worked late nights and early mornings to turn my vision into functional code because they believed in what we were building together. I'm ready, I said, the words carrying the weight of 3 years of preparation and a lifetime of being told I wasn't quite enough. Let's build something extraordinary. We spent the next 2 hours going through contract details, implementation timelines, and strategic priorities. David's team had already identified potential clients in 12 major markets, companies that fit the profile of businesses that would benefit most from our platform. The expansion plan was aggressive but achievable, built on the foundation of proven results and scalable technology. As David gathered his materials to leave, he paused at the door. Sarah, I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've learned to recognize the difference between good ideas and game-changing innovations. What you've built isn't just impressive technically, it's impressive because it solves real problems for people who need solutions they can afford. That combination is rare, and it's why I believe this partnership will be transformational for everyone involved. After he left, Jessica and I sat in the conference room, the signed partnership agreement between us on the table like a bridge to a future we'd worked toward but hardly dared to imagine. The silence was comfortable, filled with the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you've just crossed a threshold that changes everything. So, Jessica said finally, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and trepidation, when do we tell everyone we're about to become a real company? My father settled into his recliner, remote in hand, ready to catch the evening news. Michael continued scrolling through property listings on his phone, always looking for the next deal, the next opportunity to prove his worth through transactions and commissions. They were good people living good lives according to the blueprint they understood. But I was building something different, something that didn't fit neatly into their categories of success and failure. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Phoenix, past the neighborhoods where I'd grown up and the schools where I'd learned to dream bigger than my circumstances, I made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, I would stop trying to translate my accomplishments into language they could understand. I would stop shrinking my ambitions to fit their comfort level. I would stop waiting for permission to be proud of what I'd built. Instead, I would focus on the next phase of growth, the expansion that would make my success impossible to dismiss or diminish. Not because I needed their approval, but because I owed it to myself to see how far this dream could go when I stopped apologizing for dreaming it. The platform I'd been developing in secret was ready for beta testing with a select group of high-profile clients. The partnership proposal from David Kim, a venture capitalist who specialized in marketing technology, was sitting in my email inbox waiting for my response. The office lease was signed, the hiring plan was drafted, and the business plan that would triple our revenue within 18 months was ready to implement. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, I would stop being the daughter who didn't quite measure up and start being the CEO who was about to change everything. Not for them, but for me. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. The girl, who'd spent Sunday dinners feeling invisible, was about to become impossible to ignore. Monday morning arrived like a declaration of independence. I woke before my alarm, dressed in the navy blazer I'd been saving for special occasions, and drove downtown to the office building where everything was about to change. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt different this time, not like visiting a potential space, but like claiming territory I'd already conquered. When I walked into what would soon be Catalyst Digital Solutions' new headquarters, the morning light streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to illuminate more than just empty rooms. Jessica Chen was already there, laptop open, on the reception desk we'd ordered the week before, her efficient energy filling the space with purpose. At 26, she possessed the kind of organizational brilliance that made impossible schedules look effortless and complex projects appear simple. I'd hired her 6 months ago when my one-woman operation started drowning in its own success, and she'd quickly evolved from assistant to right-hand strategist, to the person who understood my vision better than I understood it myself. "Good morning, boss," she said, looking up from her screen with the smile that had become the foundation of every successful day. That word, boss, still sent a small thrill through me every time she said it, not because of the authority it represented, but because of the recognition. Someone saw me as a leader worth following, a vision worth supporting, a business worth dedicating their considerable talents to building. I set my purse down on the desk that would soon hold my nameplate and surveyed the space that represented 3 years of 20-hour days, rejection after rejection, and the kind of stubborn determination that refuses to accept other people's limitations as fact. "Jessica, I need you to schedule a call with David Kim for this afternoon. It's time to move forward with the partnership proposal." Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Already done. He's available at 3, and I've prepared the preliminary agreements based on the terms you discussed last week. Also, Amanda Thompson from Phoenix Growth Partners called this morning. She wants to discuss bringing her entire client portfolio onto our platform." She paused, stylus hovering over her tablet. "Sarah, if we sign both deals, we'll need to hire at least 8 people within the next month." The magnitude of that statement settled over me like a warm coat on a cold morning. 8 employees, a team, a company that existed beyond my spare bedroom and sleepless nights. I walked to the windows and looked out at the Phoenix skyline, the mountains rising in the distance like silent witnesses to dreams being built one decision at a time. Then we better start looking for the right people. What my family didn't understand, what they couldn't see from their Sunday dinner table, was that while Michael was closing individual deals, I was building systems that would generate revenue long after the initial sale. Every client who implemented my platform wasn't just paying for a service. They were becoming part of an ecosystem that grew stronger with each new addition. The artificial intelligence I'd developed learned from every interaction, every campaign, every success and failure, becoming more valuable with each passing day. The bakery in Tempe wasn't just succeeding because of good marketing. They were succeeding because my platform had identified that their customers were 30% more likely to purchase specialty items on Thursday afternoons, leading to targeted promotions that increased average order value by 47%. The yoga studio wasn't just filling classes. The question made us both laugh, the kind of laughter that comes from relief and anticipation, and the peculiar joy of shared accomplishment. I looked around the space that would soon buzz with activity, filled with talented people working on projects that mattered to businesses across the country. We start with the job postings tomorrow. Senior developers, account managers, project coordinators, people who understand that we're not just building a company, we're building a movement. The rest of the afternoon flew by in a blur of strategic planning and practical preparations. We outlined the hiring process, discussed office layout and equipment needs, and began mapping out the client onboarding system that would need to handle 10 times our current volume within 6 months. Every decision felt momentous, weighted with the knowledge that we were laying the foundation for something much larger than either of us had initially envisioned. By the time I drove home that evening, the Phoenix skyline looked different. Not just because I was seeing it from the perspective of someone who'd just secured the resources to scale a dream into reality, but because I finally understood what it felt like to be taken seriously by people who mattered in ways that went beyond family approval or social acceptance. I pulled into my driveway, the modest duplex I'd been renting for the past 3 years, and allowed myself a moment to appreciate the contrast between where I lived and what I was building. Success, I was learning, wasn't always about upgrading your lifestyle. Sometimes it was about having the confidence to invest everything back into the vision, knowing that the personal rewards would come when the foundation was solid enough to support them. Inside, I opened my laptop and began drafting the email that would change everything. Not the partnership announcement or the hiring plan or the client expansion strategy. The email to my parents, simple and direct, explaining that I wouldn't be able to make Sunday dinner this week because I was in the middle of closing deals that would triple the size of my business by the end of the year. I didn't mention David, Kim's partnership offer, or Amanda Thompson's client portfolio, or the office lease that represented more than they spent on their mortgage. I didn't explain the technology we'd developed or the market opportunity we were positioned to capture. I simply told them I was busy with work, the same way Michael might mention being busy with a property deal, and hit send before I could second-guess the decision. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't trying to translate my accomplishments into language they could understand. I wasn't shrinking my achievements to fit their comfort level or apologizing for pursuing something they couldn't categorize. I was simply informing them of a scheduling conflict, the way any busy professional might do, without elaboration or justification. The freedom that came with that simple act of boundary setting was intoxicating. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on my small balcony overlooking the neighborhood where I'd been dreaming of something bigger, and allowed myself to feel proud of what I'd built without qualification or comparison to anyone else's definition of success. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new levels of responsibility that would test everything I thought I knew about leadership and vision, and the courage required to build something meaningful. But tonight, I was simply Sarah Martinez, founder and CEO of a company that was about to change how small businesses across the country approached their most critical challenge, connecting with customers in ways that created lasting value for everyone involved. The girl who'd spent Sunday dinners feeling invisible was about to become impossible to ignore. Not because she'd proven her family wrong, but because she'd finally proven herself right. 3 weeks later, everything changed in ways I never could have anticipated. The morning started like any other Wednesday, with Jessica coordinating interviews for our rapidly expanding team, and me reviewing client proposals that represented more revenue than I'd generated in my first 2 years combined. Our new office buzzed with the energy of controlled chaos, 5 new employees settling into their roles while we prepared to onboard clients who would test every system we'd built. Amanda Thompson arrived at 10 sharp for what I'd assumed would be a routine partnership discussion. Instead, she walked into our conference room carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone about to deliver news that would reshape everything. At 52, Amanda had built Phoenix Growth Partners from a small consulting firm into the Southwest's premier business development company, representing over 200 clients across industries that ranged from healthcare to manufacturing to hospitality. Sarah, I've spent the past month testing your platform with 12 of my most demanding clients, she began, setting the briefcase on the table and opening it to reveal a thick stack of reports. The results are unlike anything I've seen in 25 years of business consulting. She pulled out the first document, a comprehensive analysis that made my heart race with possibilities I hadn't dared to consider. The numbers were staggering. A family-owned restaurant chain had increased their online orders by 400% while reducing their marketing spend by 30%. A boutique hotel had achieved occupancy rates that exceeded their peak season averages during traditionally slow months. A manufacturing company had identified new customer segments they'd never considered, leading to contract negotiations worth millions in potential revenue. What you've built isn't just marketing automation, Amanda continued, her voice carrying the kind of excitement that comes from discovering something genuinely revolutionary. It's business intelligence that small and medium companies have never had access to before. You're democratizing insights that Fortune 500 companies pay millions to consultants like McKinsey to provide. I leaned forward, studying reports that validated everything I'd believed about the platform's potential, but had struggled to quantify. Each case study represented months of development, testing, and refinement that had happened while my family dismissed my work as playing around with computers. While Michael was celebrating individual property sales, I'd been building technology that could transform entire industries. Here's what I'm proposing, Amanda said, pulling out a contract that was significantly thicker than anything I'd seen before. I want to bring my entire client portfolio onto your platform, but more than that, I want to offer you something unprecedented. A strategic partnership that makes Catalyst Digital Solutions the exclusive technology provider for Phoenix Growth Partners consulting services. The magnitude of what she was suggesting hit me like a physical force. Phoenix Growth Partners worked with companies that generated anywhere from $5 million to $50 million in annual revenue. These weren't small businesses struggling to establish themselves. These were established companies looking to optimize and expand, companies that paid premium rates for proven solutions. The financial terms are generous, Amanda continued, sliding the contract across the table. But what I'm really offering you is credibility at a level that typically takes companies decades to achieve. When we endorse your platform to our clients, we're betting our reputation on your technology. That's not something we do lightly. I picked up the contract, scanning terms that represented more than money or business expansion. They represented entrance into a tier of professional recognition that would make my family's definitions of success seem quaint by comparison. The partnership would position Catalyst Digital Solutions as the technology backbone for some of the Southwest's most successful companies, giving us case studies and testimonials that competitors with decades of experience couldn't match. There's something else, Amanda said, her tone shifting to something more personal. I've been watching your trajectory for the past year, and I see something in you that reminds me of myself 25 years ago. The hunger to prove that intelligence and innovation matter more than connections and conventional approaches. I want to be part of what you're building, not just as a partner, but as an investor. She pulled out a second document, this one, outlining an equity investment that would provide Catalyst Digital Solutions with the capital to expand beyond Arizona into markets across the Southwest and eventually nationwide. The terms were structured to maintain my controlling interest, while providing resources and strategic guidance that would accelerate our growth by years rather than months. I'm offering you something I've never offered another entrepreneur, Amanda said, meeting my eyes directly. Full access to my network, my experience, and my client relationships, in exchange for the opportunity to be part of what I believe will be the next major transformation in how businesses approach growth and customer engagement. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of Phoenix traffic 15 floors below. I found myself thinking about all the moments that had led to this one. The late nights spent learning programming languages that didn't exist when I was in college. The rejections from potential clients who couldn't see past their preconceptions about young women in technology. The family dinners where my accomplishments were dismissed as hobbies rather than career achievements. Amanda, I need to understand something, I said, setting the contracts aside and focusing on the woman across from me who was offering to transform my business overnight. Why now? Why me? You could partner with established companies, proven platforms, organizations with track records that stretch back decades. She smiled, the kind of smile that comes from recognizing a kindred spirit. Because established companies are limited by their own success. They've found formulas that work, and they're terrified of changing them even when the market evolves beyond their reach. You're building something from the ground up, without the baggage of legacy systems or entrenched thinking. Your platform does things that companies 10 times your size can't do, because you're not constrained by what's always been done. Amanda stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the Phoenix skyline with the expression of someone who'd spent decades watching businesses rise and fall based on their ability to adapt to changing markets. I've seen what happens to companies that dismiss innovation because it comes from unexpected sources. They spend fortunes trying to catch up to solutions that entrepreneurs like you developed in spare bedrooms and small offices, driven by nothing, more than the belief that there had to be a better way. She turned back to face me, her expression serious but hopeful. I'm betting on you because you've already proven that you can build something extraordinary with limited resources and no institutional support. Imagine what you could accomplish with the backing and credibility that this partnership would provide. I thought about Jessica, fielding calls from potential clients faster than we could schedule meetings. I thought about the developers who'd believed in the platform's potential enough to work for equity rather than traditional salaries. I thought about the small business owners whose lives had been transformed by technology that helped them compete against companies with unlimited marketing budgets. If we do this, I said, picking up the contracts and feeling their weight in my hands, we're not just growing a business. We're proving that innovation doesn't require permission, that excellence speaks for itself, and that the best solutions often come from people who've been underestimated by everyone except themselves. Amanda's smile widened. Exactly. And when your family sees the announcement in the Phoenix Business Journal next month, they'll understand that what you've been building wasn't a phase or a hobby. It was the foundation of something that will change how business gets done across the Southwest. I signed both contracts that afternoon, surrounded by team members who understood that they weren't just witnessing business deals, but career-defining moments that would reshape their professional futures. The equity investment would allow us to hire senior developers and account managers within weeks rather than months. The strategic partnership would provide credibility and client relationships that typically took years to develop. As Amanda gathered her materials to leave, she paused at the conference room door. Sarah, I want you to know that this decision isn't just about business potential. It's about recognizing someone who has the vision and determination to build something meaningful. 25 years ago, I was where you are now, trying to prove that I belonged in rooms where people like me weren't traditionally welcome. The difference is that you're not just proving you belong. You're changing the conversation entirely. After she left, I sat alone in the conference room, looking at the signed contracts that represented the kind of validation I'd spent 3 years working toward. Not validation from family or friends or people who'd known me before I started building something extraordinary. Validation from industry leaders who understood what I'd accomplished and wanted to be part of what came next. Jessica knocked on the conference room door, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing the kind of grin that suggested she'd been eavesdropping on enough of the conversation to understand its significance. Boss, I think this calls for a celebration. She set the bottle on the table next to the contracts. and maybe a bigger office because we're going to need space for about 20 more people. We opened the champagne and toasted to partnerships that would transform Catalyst Digital Solutions from a promising startup into a major player in business technology. As the afternoon sun streamed through our floor-to-ceiling windows, I felt the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you've just crossed a threshold that changes everything about how the world sees you and how you see yourself. The phone rang as we were finishing our impromptu celebration. Jessica glanced at the caller ID and raised her eyebrows. "It's Phoenix Tech Weekly. They want to schedule an interview about the partnership announcement." She paused, stylus hovering over her tablet. "Sarah, they're treating you like a major industry figure. This isn't a human interest story about a local entrepreneur. This is business news that matters to people who make decisions worth millions of dollars." I took the phone, feeling the shift that comes when journalists who cover serious business developments want to discuss your strategic moves rather than your inspirational journey. The interview was scheduled for the following week, positioned as a feature about technology innovation in the Southwest business community. As the day wound down and our small team prepared to leave, I found myself standing at the windows again, looking out at a city that was beginning to see me differently, not as the daughter who couldn't quite measure up to traditional expectations, but as the CEO who was building solutions that established companies couldn't replicate. My phone buzzed with a text message from David Kim. "Saw the preliminary announcement about the Phoenix Growth Partners deal. Brilliant strategic move. This positions you perfectly for the next phase of national expansion we discussed. Call me tomorrow to discuss accelerating our timeline." I smiled, realizing that success had created its own momentum. Each partnership, each client win, each validation from industry leaders made the next opportunity more accessible, more substantial, more aligned with the vision I'd been building toward since those first late nights in my spare bedroom. Driving home through familiar Phoenix streets, I passed the neighborhood where I'd grown up, the schools where I'd learned to dream bigger than my circumstances, and the coffee shop where I'd spent countless hours developing business plans that everyone around me had dismissed as unrealistic. Tonight, those dreams weren't just realistic. They were conservative compared to what was actually happening. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, appreciating the contrast between the modest duplex where I lived and the industry transformation I was helping to lead. Success, I was learning, wasn't always about upgrading your lifestyle immediately. Sometimes it was about having the confidence to invest everything back into the vision, knowing that the personal rewards would come when the foundation was strong enough to support them. Inside, I opened my laptop and began drafting an email that would change the dynamic of Sunday dinner conversations forever. Not an explanation or justification of my career choices, but a simple announcement that I'd been featured in Phoenix Business Journal as one of the Southwest's most innovative technology entrepreneurs, alongside news of strategic partnerships that would triple our company's reach within 6 months. I didn't elaborate on the financial implications or explain the technology we'd developed. I didn't compare my achievements to Michael's real estate success or seek approval for the path I'd chosen. I simply shared news the way any successful professional might share career developments with family, and hit send before I could second-guess the decision. The response came within minutes. My mother called, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and confusion that suggested she was struggling to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the business leader being described in newspaper articles. "Mija, I read the article online. I don't understand everything about what you do, but I can see that it's important work. I'm proud of you." The words carried weight that went beyond family approval. They represented the beginning of recognition that what I'd been building wasn't just different from traditional career paths, but valuable in ways that mattered to people beyond my immediate circle of supporters and clients. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't translating my accomplishments into language others could understand. I wasn't minimizing my success to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. I was simply being myself, sharing achievements that spoke for themselves, and allowing the people who mattered most to me to see who I was becoming without apology or explanation. The girl who'd spent years feeling invisible at family gatherings was about to become the industry leader whose innovations were reshaping how business got done across the Southwest. Not because she'd proven anyone wrong, but because she'd finally proven herself right. The first sign that everything was about to unravel came on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered through a phone call that would expose the difference between building something lasting and chasing quick wins. Jessica answered with her usual professional warmth, but her expression shifted to concern as she listened to the voice on the other end. She covered the phone and whispered urgently, "It's Thomas. Rodriguez from Southwest Business Analytics. He says it's about Michael." I took the call in my office, the one with the view of downtown Phoenix that had become my sanctuary for handling the complex challenges that came with rapid growth. Thomas was someone I'd met at industry networking events, a data analyst who specialized in tracking market trends and business performance across Arizona's commercial real estate sector. His voice carried the careful tone of someone delivering news that would be uncomfortable to hear. "Sarah, I thought you should know. What's happening with your brother's business before it becomes public knowledge?" he began, his words measured and deliberate. "Michael's been struggling for the past 6 months. The commercial real estate market has shifted dramatically, and he hasn't adapted his approach to match current conditions. 3 of his biggest deals fell through last quarter, and he's facing serious financial pressures." I leaned back in my chair, processing information that felt surreal given the confidence Michael had displayed at every family gathering. The brother who'd been held up as the example of traditional success, whose achievements had been used to highlight my own apparent shortcomings, was experiencing the kind of professional crisis that exposes the difference between sustainable business models and those dependent on favorable market conditions. "There's more," Thomas continued, his tone growing even more serious. "He's been telling clients that he has access to advanced marketing analytics through a family connection, apparently referencing your company. Some of these clients have been asking questions about services you don't actually provide, and there are concerns about misrepresentation that could affect both of your professional reputations." The implications hit me immediately. Michael wasn't just struggling with his own business challenges. He was trying to leverage my success to salvage his failing operations, making promises about capabilities and services that didn't exist while trading on family connections I'd never authorized him to use. The irony was devastating and complete. I spent the rest of the morning making discreet inquiries, reaching out to contacts in the commercial real estate industry who could provide additional context about Michael's situation. What I learned painted a picture of someone who'd built his entire professional identity around market conditions that no longer existed, refusing to adapt to changes that more successful agents had recognized and adjusted to months earlier. The Phoenix commercial real estate market had indeed shifted dramatically. Remote work trends had reduced demand for traditional office space, while increased interest in mixed-use developments had created opportunities that required different expertise and client relationships than Michael possessed. Agents who'd diversified their services and updated their marketing approaches were thriving, while those who'd relied on established formulas were struggling to generate leads and close deals. Amanda Thompson called that afternoon with news that made the situation even more complex. "Sarah, I need to discuss something delicate with you. We've had 3 inquiries from potential clients who were approached by someone claiming to represent Catalyst Digital Solutions for Real Estate Marketing Services. The person was apparently offering analytics and automation tools specifically designed for property sales, using your company's name and reputation." I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach as the pieces fell into place. Michael hadn't just mentioned our family connection to potential clients. He'd actively misrepresented his relationship with my company, possibly crossing legal boundaries in his desperation to salvage his failing business. The brother who'd spent years dismissing my work as a hobby was now trying to profit from the reputation I'd built without his support or recognition. "Amanda, I want to be absolutely clear," I said, choosing my words carefully. Catalyst Digital Solutions has never provided services specifically for real estate marketing, and we've never authorized anyone to represent our company in that capacity. If someone is making those claims, they're acting without our knowledge or permission. Her silence stretched for several seconds before she responded. I was afraid that's what you'd say. Sarah, this puts us in a difficult position. Our reputation depends on accurate representation of our partner's capabilities. If there are people in the market making false claims about your services, it could affect how potential clients perceive both our companies. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, during which we developed a strategy for addressing the misrepresentation without creating unnecessary public drama. Amanda would contact the affected clients directly, clarifying Catalyst Digital Solutions' actual service offerings while ensuring they understood that any previous communications about real estate marketing tools hadn't come from authorized representatives. After hanging up, I sat in my office trying to process the emotional complexity of the situation. The brother who'd never taken my business seriously was now attempting to exploit its success to save his own failing venture. The family member who'd been positioned as the example of traditional achievement was facing professional collapse while I was experiencing unprecedented growth and recognition. Jessica knocked on my door, carrying a stack of messages from journalists and industry analysts who'd gotten wind of the story. Word traveled fast in Phoenix's business community, and the contrast between Michael's struggles and my success had apparently caught the attention of people who covered local business developments for a living. Boss, Phoenix Business Weekly wants to do a feature story about siblings in business, focusing on different approaches to market adaptation during economic uncertainty, she said, setting the messages on my desk. They're specifically interested in how traditional industries and tech innovation are responding differently to current market conditions. I looked at the interview requests, understanding that my response would shape not just how this story was covered, but how my family would perceive my handling of Michael's professional crisis. The easy path would be to decline all interviews, protecting family relationships at the cost of missing opportunities to establish myself as a thought leader in business adaptation and innovation. The strategic path would be to participate in interviews that positioned me as an expert in helping businesses navigate changing market conditions while being careful not to specifically reference Michael's situation or exploit his struggles for professional gain. I could discuss general principles of business adaptation without making the story about family dynamics or personal relationships. David Kim called that evening, having heard about the situation through industry networks that seemed to know about business developments before the people directly involved fully understood their implications. Sarah, I want to discuss how this situation affects our partnership and expansion plans. The market is paying attention to how you handle this challenge, and your response could significantly impact your reputation as a business leader. We talked for over an hour about the delicate balance between protecting family relationships and maintaining professional integrity. David's perspective was invaluable, coming from someone who'd navigated similar situations where personal relationships intersected with business reputations in ways that required careful handling. The key is to focus on your own achievements and capabilities without referencing or exploiting anyone else's struggles, he advised. Let your success speak for itself, and let other people draw their own conclusions about market adaptation and business strategy. You don't need to prove anything about traditional approaches versus innovative ones. The results already tell that story. I spent the next day crafting responses to interview requests that would allow me to discuss business innovation and market adaptation without making the story about family dynamics. The journalists were interested in broader trends about how different industries were responding to economic uncertainty, and I could contribute valuable insights about technology's role in helping businesses remain competitive during challenging periods. The Phoenix Business Weekly interview took place in our conference room, with the journalist asking thoughtful questions about the differences between businesses that thrived during market shifts versus those that struggled to adapt. I discussed the importance of data-driven decision-making, the value of understanding customer behavior patterns, and the competitive advantages that came from embracing technology rather than resisting it. What advice would you give to business owners who've built their success around traditional approaches but are now facing market conditions that challenge those methods? The journalist asked, clearly fishing for commentary that could be applied to Michael's situation without me having to reference it directly. I chose my words carefully, focusing on general principles rather than specific situations. The most successful business owners I work with understand that methods and markets evolve, but fundamental principles like understanding your customers, delivering exceptional value, and adapting to changing conditions remain constant. The businesses that struggle are usually those that mistake their methods for their principles. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, covering topics like the role of technology in business adaptation, the importance of data analytics in understanding market trends, and the competitive advantages that came from embracing innovation rather than defending outdated approaches. Throughout the conversation, I maintained focus on positive, forward-looking insights rather than criticism of any particular industry or approach. When the article was published the following week, it positioned me as a thoughtful voice in discussions about business adaptation and innovation, without exploiting Michael's struggles or creating family drama. The piece highlighted Catalyst Digital Solutions as an example of how technology companies were helping traditional businesses navigate changing market conditions, while noting that the most successful enterprises were those that embraced change, rather than resisting it. My father called me that evening, his voice carrying emotions I'd rarely heard from him before. Misha, I read the article in the business paper. I want you to know that I'm proud of how you handled a difficult situation. You could have used Michael's problems to make yourself look better, but you took the high road. That shows character. The conversation was brief but significant, representing the first time my father had acknowledged that my approach to business and professional relationships demonstrated values he respected. More importantly, it suggested that he was beginning to understand the difference between building something sustainable and chasing short-term wins, even if he couldn't fully articulate that distinction. Michael himself called 2 days later, his voice strained with the kind of exhaustion that comes from watching carefully constructed plans fall apart despite desperate efforts to save them. Sarah, I owe you an apology. I made some poor decisions when I was trying to save my business, and I used your name in ways I shouldn't have. I know that could have caused problems for you, and I'm sorry. The apology was genuine but painful to receive, coming from someone whose confidence and success had been central to family dynamics for as long as I could remember. I found myself in the unexpected position of offering comfort and support to the brother who'd spent years questioning my career choices and dismissing my achievements as unrealistic dreams. Michael, we all make mistakes when we're under pressure, I replied, meaning every word. What matters is learning from them and moving forward. If there's anything I can do to help you rebuild, within appropriate boundaries, I'm willing to discuss it. We talked for over an hour about the challenges he was facing and potential strategies for rebuilding his business around current market conditions, rather than hoping for a return to previous circumstances. I offered to connect him with some of the business development resources I'd worked with, while being clear that any professional relationship would need to be separate from our family connection. The conversation marked a fundamental shift in our relationship, moving from the competitive dynamic that had defined our interactions for decades towards something approaching mutual respect and support. For the first time, Michael was asking for my professional advice rather than questioning my career choices, and I was in a position to offer guidance from a place of established success rather than defensive justification. Amanda Thompson reached out later that week with an update on the situation with the affected clients. Sarah, I wanted you to know that we've resolved the misrepresentation issues, and actually, the clarification process has generated additional interest in your actual services. 3 of the companies are now interested in exploring how your platform could help them with their customer engagement challenges. The irony was complete and strangely satisfying. Michael's attempt to leverage my success for his own benefit had ultimately created new business opportunities for Catalyst Digital Solutions, while exposing his own business to the kind of scrutiny that revealed its fundamental weaknesses. The market had responded by rewarding innovation and authentic value creation, while punishing misrepresentation and resistance to change. As March ended and April began, I found myself reflecting on how profoundly the dynamics had shifted within just a few weeks. The brother who'd been held up as the example of traditional success was rebuilding his career with my guidance and support. The parents who'd questioned my unconventional path were expressing pride in my professional achievements and personal integrity. The family dinners that had once been exercises in feeling inadequate had become opportunities to share insights and offer support based on hard-earned expertise. The girl who'd spent years being dismissed as too focused on results had become the family member others turned to for strategic advice and professional guidance. Not because I'd proven anyone wrong, but because I'd consistently proven myself right. Building something valuable through persistent effort and principled decision-making that created opportunities for everyone around me to succeed. The transformation was complete, but it felt less like victory than evolution. Success hadn't made the relationships disappear or the challenges irrelevant. It had simply changed the context in which those relationships existed, creating space for mutual respect and support that hadn't been possible when everyone was operating from positions of insecurity and comparison. Jessica knocked on my office door that Friday afternoon, carrying the weekly summary of new client inquiries and partnership opportunities that had become a reliable indicator of our continued growth. "Boss, I have news that I think you'll find interesting. We just received an inquiry from Martinez Property Solutions. They're interested in exploring our customer analytics platform for their business development efforts." I looked up from my computer, recognizing Michael's company name, and understanding immediately that he was taking our conversation about rebuilding his business more seriously than I'd expected. The request represented more than potential business. It represented acknowledgment that the technology I'd developed could provide value even for industries that had traditionally relied on personal relationships and established networks rather than data-driven insights. "Schedule a meeting for next week," I told Jessica, smiling at the symmetry of the situation. "And make sure we treat this inquiry like any other potential client. Professional, thorough, and focused on delivering genuine value rather than family considerations." The wheel had come full circle, but the destination was different than anyone could have predicted. The family dynamics that had once been sources of frustration and competition had become foundations for mutual support and shared success. The sister who'd been underestimated was now positioned to help the brother who'd once dismissed her achievements, not from a place of superiority or revenge, but from genuine expertise and hard-earned wisdom about what it took to build something lasting in an ever-changing market. 6 months later, standing in the ballroom of the Phoenix Convention Center, I watched as the Arizona Business Excellence Awards presenter called my name for the second time. The category was Entrepreneur of the Year, and as I walked across the stage to accept the crystal trophy that would sit in our expanded office lobby, I felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The applause was thunderous, but what struck me most was seeing my entire family in the audience, their faces glowing with pride that felt both foreign and deeply satisfying. The speech I gave that night was brief but meaningful, focusing on the importance of persistence, the value of building something that serves others, and the courage required to pursue visions that don't fit conventional molds. I didn't mention the Sunday dinners where my work had been dismissed, the years of feeling invisible, or the journey from spare bedroom entrepreneur to recognized industry leader. Instead, I focused on the future, on the potential for technology to democratize business success, and on the responsibility that comes with having a platform to influence positive change. After the ceremony, The reception buzzed with conversations about partnerships, investments, and opportunities that would have seemed impossible when I was developing my first client proposals in my duplex 3 years earlier. CEOs of major corporations approached me to discuss how Catalyst Digital Solutions could help their organizations adapt to changing market conditions. Venture capitalists who'd never returned my calls were suddenly interested in exploring expansion opportunities across the Southwest and beyond. But the conversation that mattered most happened near the end of the evening, when my father approached me with tears in his eyes and words that reframed our entire relationship. "Mija, I owe you an apology that's been a long time coming. For years, I measured success by what I could understand, what looked familiar to me. I couldn't see that you were building something extraordinary, because it didn't fit my definition of what business should look like." He paused, looking down at the award in my hands before meeting my eyes again. "Tonight, listening to all these important people talk about your work, about how you've changed their businesses and their lives, I finally understand what you've been trying to show us all along. You weren't just building a company, you were building a legacy. And I'm proud of you not just for what you've accomplished, but for how you've handled success with grace and humility." The words hit deeper than any business achievement ever could. This wasn't just parental approval finally extended after years of withholding. This was recognition from someone whose respect I'd craved my entire life. Acknowledgment that my path had been valid even when it seemed incomprehensible to everyone around me. The validation came not because I'd conformed to his expectations, but because I'd exceeded them so completely that he'd been forced to expand his definition of what success could look like. My mother joined us, her own eyes bright with emotion. "Sarah, I've been thinking about all those times I worried about your future. All those conversations where I tried to convince you to choose something more secure. I realize now that I was afraid because I couldn't see where your path was leading. But you could see it, couldn't you? You knew all along that you were building something special." The three of us stood there in the elegant ballroom, surrounded by Phoenix's business elite, and had the kind of honest conversation that should have happened years earlier, but somehow felt perfectly timed for this moment. They asked about my plans for the company, about the challenges of leadership, about the lessons I'd learned from taking risks that had seemed foolish to everyone except me. Michael approached our small circle with his wife, both of them carrying expressions that mixed pride with something that looked like wonderment. "Sarah, I've been watching you work with our team over the past few months, and I have to say, what you've built is incredible. Not just the technology, but the way you lead people, the way you see opportunities that others miss. I've learned more about business strategy in 6 months of working with you than I learned in 6 years of trying to figure it out on my own." The transformation in our relationship had been gradual but profound. After his initial apology and request for help, Michael had become one of my most dedicated students, approaching the rebuild of his business with the same systematic thinking that had made Catalyst Digital Solutions successful. He'd embraced data analytics, customer relationship management, and strategic planning with the enthusiasm of someone who'd discovered tools that could transform not just his results, but his entire approach to professional challenges. His real estate business was thriving again, but in a completely different way than before. Instead of relying on personal connections and market timing, he'd built systems that identified opportunities, nurtured client relationships, and delivered consistent value regardless of external conditions. The brother who'd once dismissed my focus on results had become someone who measured everything, analyzed patterns, and made decisions based on evidence rather than intuition. "The best part," Michael continued, "is that success feels different now. Before, I was always worried about the next deal, the next commission, the next market shift that could derail everything. Now I feel like I'm building something sustainable, something that gets stronger over time instead of more fragile." He paused, looking at me with the expression of someone who'd learned a lesson that went far beyond business strategy. "You tried to tell me that years ago, but I wasn't ready to listen. The evening concluded with a private dinner at one of Phoenix's finest restaurants, just our family and a few close friends who'd supported my journey from the beginning. Jessica was there, of course, having evolved from assistant to business, partner to someone whose strategic thinking had become essential to every major decision we made. David Kim joined us, bringing stories about the national expansion plans that would take Catalyst Digital Solutions into markets across the country within the next 18 months. Amanda Thompson raised her glass for a toast that captured the spirit of the evening perfectly. To Sarah Martinez, who proved that the best way to predict the future is to create it, your success isn't just personal. It's inspiration for everyone who's ever been told their dreams are too big, their methods too unconventional, or their vision too ambitious for practical consideration. As the night wound down and conversations shifted to plans for the future, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The girl who'd felt invisible at family dinners had become someone whose opinions were sought by industry leaders and whose innovations were changing how businesses operated across multiple sectors. The daughter who'd been encouraged to choose more secure paths had built something more secure than any traditional job could ever provide. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that true success wasn't about proving other people wrong. It was about proving yourself right, consistently and persistently, until the evidence became impossible to ignore. The family members who'd questioned my choices hadn't been malicious or deliberately unsupportive. They'd simply been operating from frameworks that couldn't accommodate the possibilities I was pursuing. When those possibilities became realities, their frameworks expanded to include new definitions of achievement and success. The following Monday, I arrived at our office to find Jessica coordinating the setup of our new conference room, designed to accommodate the larger client meetings and strategic planning sessions that had become routine parts of our operations. Our team had grown to 23 employees, each bringing specialized expertise that contributed to our ability to serve clients with increasingly complex needs and ambitious goals. The morning brought news that captured the magnitude of what we'd accomplished. A Fortune 500 company had approached us about licensing our platform for their internal use, recognizing that the technology we'd developed for small businesses could be scaled to help large organizations optimize their customer engagement strategies. The licensing deal would provide revenue streams that dwarfed anything I'd imagined when I was working alone in my spare bedroom. "Boss, there's something else I need to show you," Jessica said, pulling up an email on her tablet that made me pause in recognition. We received an inquiry from a business development firm in Chicago. They're representing a group of investors who want to discuss acquisition possibilities. The preliminary valuation they're suggesting is significant. I looked at the numbers, understanding that they represented more than financial opportunity. They represented validation at a level that transcended regional recognition or industry awards. National investors were recognizing Catalyst Digital Solutions as a company worth acquiring, not just for its current performance, but for its potential to transform how businesses approached customer relationships and growth strategies. The irony wasn't lost on me that success had created options I'd never considered when I was focused simply on building something valuable. The platform that had started as a solution to help small businesses compete more effectively had evolved into technology that could benefit organizations of any size, in any industry, facing any competitive challenge that required deeper understanding of customer behavior and market dynamics. David Kim called that afternoon to discuss the acquisition inquiry and its implications for our expansion plans. "Sarah, this is the kind of opportunity that validates everything we've been working toward. But it's also a decision that will define the next phase of your career. Are you ready to think about what comes after building a successful company?" The question forced me to consider possibilities I'd been too focused on immediate challenges to contemplate. Selling the company would provide financial security, beyond anything I'd ever imagined. But it would also mean giving up control of the vision I'd spent years developing and refining. Staying independent would preserve that control, but require navigating increasingly complex challenges as we scaled, to serve larger clients with more demanding expectations. "I need time to think about this," I told David. realizing that the decision would affect not just my own future, but the careers of every person who'd chosen to build their professional lives around what we were creating together. This isn't just about financial returns. It's about the mission we're pursuing and the impact we want to have on the businesses we serve. That evening, I called a team meeting to discuss the acquisition opportunity and gather input from the people whose expertise and dedication had made our success possible. The conversation was intense and thoughtful, covering everything from personal career goals to the potential for maintaining our company culture within a larger organization. Jessica spoke for many of us when she said, "Boss, whatever you decide, I want you to know that working here has been the most meaningful professional experience of my life. We've built something that matters, something that genuinely helps people achieve goals they couldn't reach on their own. That's rare, and it's worth protecting." The sentiment was echoed by developers who'd seen their innovations help small businesses compete with industry giants, by account managers who'd watched clients transform their operations and achieve unprecedented growth, and by strategists who'd contributed to solutions that were being recognized as industry best practices. Over the following weeks, I found myself having conversations with advisors, industry experts, and business leaders who'd navigated similar decisions. The consistent theme was that the choice between independence and acquisition wasn't just financial. It was about vision, values, and the kind of legacy I wanted to build through the work that had become central to my identity. The decision crystallized during a client meeting with a small manufacturing company that had been struggling to compete against larger competitors with deeper resources and established market presence. Using our platform, they'd identified customer segments they'd never considered, developed marketing strategies that highlighted their unique advantages, and built relationships that were generating sustained revenue growth. "Sarah, what you've built didn't just save our business," the company owner told me. "It gave us hope. For the first time in years, we're not just surviving, we're thriving. And we're doing it by being smarter, not just by working harder." The gratitude in his voice reminded me why I'd started this journey in the first place. That night, I made the decision that would define the next chapter of my career and the future of Catalyst Digital Solutions. I called David Kim and told him that we would decline the acquisition offer, choosing instead to accelerate our expansion plans while maintaining the independence that allowed us to serve clients according to our own values and vision. "I want to build something that lasts," I explained. "Something that continues to democratize business intelligence and help companies of all sizes compete more effectively. An acquisition might provide short-term financial gains, but it could compromise the long-term mission that makes this work meaningful." David's response was immediate and supportive. "Sarah, that's exactly the kind of thinking that made me want to partner with you in the first place. Building something lasting requires the courage to say no to opportunities that don't align with your core mission. I'm proud to be part of what you're creating." The following Sunday, I joined my family for dinner at the same oak table where I'd once felt invisible and dismissed. But everything had changed. My parents asked thoughtful questions about business strategy and leadership challenges. Michael shared insights from his own company's transformation and sought advice about expanding into new markets. The conversation was filled with mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's work and perspectives. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what you said at the awards ceremony," my mother said as we cleared the dishes together, "about having the courage to pursue visions that don't fit conventional molds. I realize now that we tried to discourage you from taking risks, not because we didn't believe in you, but because we were afraid of watching you fail at something we couldn't understand." She paused, looking at me with the expression of someone who'd learned something important about parenting and support. "But you never failed, did you? You just succeeded in ways we didn't know how to recognize. And now, watching you make decisions about your company's future, I can see that you've always known exactly what you were building." The words carried weight that went beyond family approval or professional validation. They represented recognition that my path had been valid from the beginning, even when it seemed incomprehensible to everyone around me. The choices that had once been questioned as risky or impractical were now understood as strategic decisions that had created opportunities for success that traditional approaches couldn't have achieved. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from feeling invisible at family dinners to being recognized as an industry leader whose innovations were changing how businesses operated across multiple sectors. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been driven by a desire to prove anyone wrong. It had been the result of consistent focus on building something valuable, something that served others, something that mattered. The girl, who'd spent years being told she was too focused on results, had become the woman whose focus on results had created success that benefited everyone around her. The daughter who'd been encouraged to choose more secure paths had built security that extended far beyond personal financial stability to include meaningful work, professional recognition, and the satisfaction of knowing that her efforts had positive impact on others. Jessica was waiting in the office when I arrived Monday morning, carrying news that would launch the next phase of our expansion. "Boss, I have updates from 3 different fronts that I think you'll find exciting. First, the Fortune 500 licensing deal is moving forward with terms that exceed our initial projections. Second, we've received partnership inquiries from firms in Denver, Seattle, and Austin who want to bring our platform to their regional markets. And third, Phoenix Business Journal wants to do a cover story about the decision to remain independent, despite acquisition interest." I smiled, understanding that each piece of news represented validation of the choice to continue building rather than selling. The platform we developed was generating interest across multiple markets, creating opportunities for expansion that would allow us to serve more clients while maintaining the independence that made our work meaningful. "Jessica, I want to tell you something that I should have said months ago," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "What we've built here isn't just a company. It's a demonstration that success can be achieved through focus, persistence, and genuine commitment to serving others. You've been essential to that demonstration, and I want you to know that your contributions have made this success possible." Her smile was radiant as she replied, "Boss, working with you has taught me that the best leaders aren't those who demand recognition for their achievements. They're those who create opportunities for everyone around them to achieve more than they thought possible. That's what you've done for all of us, and it's what makes this company special." The conversation continued as we planned the next phase of expansion, discussed hiring strategies for the new markets we'd be entering, and outlined the strategic partnerships that would accelerate our growth while preserving the values that had made our success sustainable. Every decision was guided by the mission that had driven us from the beginning: democratizing business intelligence and helping companies of all sizes compete more effectively through better understanding of their customers and markets. As the morning evolved into afternoon and the afternoon into evening, I found myself surrounded by the familiar energy of a team working toward goals that mattered to everyone involved. The office buzzed with conversations about client success, stories, technology developments, and strategic opportunities that would define our impact on the business community. Looking around at the space we'd created, the team we'd assembled, and the mission we were pursuing together, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building something lasting. The journey from spare bedroom entrepreneur to recognized industry leader had been challenging, often lonely, occasionally discouraging. But it had also been exactly what I'd needed to become the person capable of creating success that benefited everyone involved. The family dinners that had once been exercises in feeling inadequate had become opportunities to share insights and offer support based on hard-earned expertise. The parents who'd questioned my unconventional path were now expressing pride in achievements that exceeded their expanded definitions of success. The brother who'd dismissed my focus on results had become someone who measured everything and made decisions based on evidence rather than assumptions. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that true success wasn't about proving other people wrong. It was about proving yourself right, consistently and persistently, until the evidence became impossible to ignore. The platform we'd built, the clients we'd served, the team we'd assembled, and the mission we were pursuing together represented proof that dreams backed by determination and strategic thinking could create realities that exceeded everyone's expectations. The girl who'd felt invisible at family gatherings had become the woman whose vision was transforming how businesses operated across multiple industries. Not because she'd conformed to others' expectations, but because she'd exceeded them so completely that those expectations had been forced to expand to accommodate new definitions of achievement and success. As evening settled over Phoenix and our team prepared to head home to their families and personal lives, I remained in my office for a few extra minutes, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new ways to serve clients who trusted us with their most important business objectives. But tonight, I was simply Sarah Martinez, the daughter who'd been told she was too focused on results, who'd proven that focus on results was exactly what the world needed. The success we'd created together wasn't just personal achievement. It was demonstration that persistence, vision, and genuine commitment to serving others could create opportunities for everyone involved to thrive. The story that had begun with feeling invisible at family dinners had become a legacy of innovation, leadership, and positive impact that would continue long after any individual recognition or award had been forgotten. That was the kind of success worth building, the kind of achievement worth celebrating, and the kind of life worth living. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.